I'm going to introduce to you, all of you here, Monta Elkins, who's going to be giving a talk labeled Meta Security Review of a Patient-Controlled Device, because as we had just covered in the last talk, it's people to people. This is about making sure that the patients have sufficient care and using the correct technologies to do so. So Monta, I would like to hand the baton to you, but I first want to say, and I told you I would do this, not only is Monta an expert in ICS and a researcher, a consultant, Monta also is the proud owner of a satellite truck. So definitely ask about that. Go ahead.
All right, thank you very much, Stacy. Lots of potential topics. Connect with me on social media, and we'll do the thing. All right, so let's get started. Hi, I'm Monta. We're going to talk about some devices in general, and then like a meta-analysis of a single device. And if you have comments as we go along the way, I will keep one eye, but I probably will have to look at them afterwards. But I would love to see your feedback. Okay, so devices. Well, the first thing is that we have to identify the computers in our environment, because we can't protect them if we don't know they're there. So here's your pop quiz. Where is the computer in this environment? There's one hiding. It's sort of back in there. It's back in there somewhere. Kind of look. Yeah, I know we're running really fast, but you've got to stay on top of it. So there it is. There is our physician station, their computer hiding there in the back, surrounded by all of this equipment. We can't really defend it if we can't find it for everything else in the room. In the meantime, I want to take us on a little bit of a side quest. I want to look at a very simple tool here, if y'all want to bring this up. But can somebody tell me what this thing is? It's pretty obvious. Let's see if we can make this, a little bigger, a little easier to see what this thing is. Okay, you probably have some sort of idea here. But what I want to tell you that this thing also is this thing is also a computer. Seriously. There's a computer in here that monitors the battery and the voltage and tells it how quickly to spin. And it's a computer that runs software. And computers that run software may be vulnerable. Computers that run software may be vulnerable. So I wrote some malware for this device, and listen really carefully here and see if you can figure out what this malware does. So here we go, a little malware for this computer. All right, hold on to just makes it a little louder and easier to hear. And maybe you recognize that tune, perhaps. But that's because that's a computer and it's capable of many things if it's compromised in them. Yes, the Emperor's March. But that's a demonstration. That might not be the most important thing in your environment, which is something you have to figure out. What's the most important thing in your environment? So I do have a rule of thumb for finding computers. And my rule of thumb for finding computers is that if it has a battery or you plug it into an electrical outlet, it's a computer. And if you've purchased it in about the last 10 years or so. But if it has a battery, you plug it in. Now there's some other tips here down the side if I learned to point in the right direction. But these things are computers. So now if we go back and look at this environment, where do we see computers? Everywhere, right? Now we have to figure out which ones are important and how much risk they have. But all of these things are computers. They all have displays. They're all sensing things and blinking lights, and you plug them in. The things that might not be a computer like all these other things that they're giving us temperatures and pressures and readings and blinking lights, and some of them have their own screens as well. So the things that we think might not be computers are like the OR table. That's kind of basic. Or maybe what else? Maybe this cart back here in the corner. All right, that's a cart, or the OR boom or anesthesia boom. Just these things that you move around. Those might not be computers, but everything else in here is. Well, I said they might not be computers, but if we look at things like the OR table, it has this control that has a screen on it, and that is very likely a computer that could be compromised. And not to mention, if we look at this one is a remote control for the OR table. This is wireless remote, right? So that might give us a little bit of remote access. I found that one cheap on eBay. If we look at the booms, they have this, I highlighted this, intuitive electric braking system. Sounds like a computer to me, probably. And if I look at that interface, that looks like that's probably computer-driven software. Well, if we look at this cart, right? Normally, these carts are a thing with drawers in them and rollers that you move around and store things in. And some of them, that's all they are. But some of them, and some meg carts, will have locks on them. And they're pretty nifty, right? You enter in the keypad and it opens up, and some of them are self-locking. When you get done, you see the lock go bzzzt, and kind of move back in the locking position. But these are computers that run software that may be compromised. And as a matter of fact, for these kind of keypad computer interfaces, I run a bunch of different attacks on these. And if you're interested, check out, I've got an upcoming online demo of keypad attacks. October the 14th, Hackfest, it'll be online, or you can go to Hollywood if you want. Hit up the social media or check here for links on how to get there. My social media is like down here below, and I will post links to that. How to do some attacks against keypad locks. Okay, so after this review, if we look back at this equipment, it's all a computer that runs software. We just don't normally think about them in that way. That's why I bring this out, is to teach people to be able to spot computers in their environments, because it's hard for people to do until you think about it a little bit. I think the only thing that might not be a computer in this environment is this plastic bottle that only has plastic tubes coming out of it, right? Or suction. Like, the rule of thumb is, does it have batteries? No. Does it have plug into electrical? No. So that's probably not. Of course, on the back end, it's plugged into something that probably is a computer. Okay, but we'll ignore that for now. So now you have to think, what might an attacker do if they were thoughtful, creative? That's something that we have to be a little creative to consider. When I look at this equipment, the secret is not to ask, what was this equipment designed for? Well, it's designed to, help save lives. But what is it capable of? Right? What is it capable of? It is capable, perhaps, of many different things compared to what it was designed for. But so what does that mean? That means that attacker might modify it so that it stopped working completely. That's fairly easy to understand. Oh yeah, I see questions about LANs and networks, and if you all want to respond to those as well, we'll touch on that very briefly in a moment. But the attack might keep the equipment from working. It stops it completely. But perhaps even more insidious, what if it continued to work, but it lied to you? Right? It gave you the wrong information about dosages and temperatures and flows and the condition of the device or the condition of the patient, right? If it lied to you, it might not form some sort of danger to a patient, but it might cause other people, professionals, to cause some sort of a bad outcome. And if you think about some things, well, the OR table, that's kind of innocuous. But if it was continuously moving, it would at least be annoying, right? It might impact the outcome. Maybe you delay, maybe you postpone this. Of course, if you were able to make them catch fire, that would be, a pretty severe impact. Or what if you just lost confidence in the devices, that they may or may not be working when you needed them to work? So I want to talk briefly about truth and lies about firmware, because people will lie to you about firmware. One of the common lies that you get, and I think vendors sometimes promote this, is that firmware does not have any security vulnerabilities. Really? It's software. It's software. People write it. People have faults. Firmware has vulnerabilities. So that's a common misconception. They say, oh, it's firmware. You don't have to. No, it's just call it software for now, right? That'll help you. Firmware doesn't have to be patched. Well, if it has an important vulnerability and an important piece of equipment that has some access to it, yes, it does. The way firmware is different from software is that it's harder to patch. It's harder to monitor. We can normally do things like take a hash of software to see that it hasn't been modified. That's a lot harder for us to do with these devices that run something we call firmware. But when people say firmware, from a security point of view, just think software. So let's look then, as I promised, a bit of meta-analysis of a particular device. I don't have anything particular against this pump or vendor. It's just a sample device, a demo. They were cheap on eBay because I think they're being replaced with other equipment. But let's look at how you might analyze equipment in this environment. So this is a Pca pump, patient-controlled analgesia or analgesia pump. Right, something you put like morphine in, and you can click the button to have it delivered. Of course, at the wrong rate and the wrong amount, those drugs can be dangerous. But these are computers running software, and they also download drug libraries into them that limits the amount and of the drug that can be given, and how quickly and how often the patient can ask for it. So how do we look at some of these devices? And I'll give you a couple of tools and concepts quickly. I'm not going to drop any 0 day on this device, right? This is just how we would look at them. One of the things, though, if it is an older device, look for existing analysis. Somebody else might have done some work on it, and there was some other work done on these devices before I took a few of them apart. And then we're going to identify the subcomponents in it and look for vulnerabilities in each of those. Whether it's the hardware or the software, there might be known vulnerabilities, which from an attacker's point of view makes this a lot easier. That means I don't have to figure it out. Somebody else has already figured it out for me. But if you're trying to do a security analysis, you can see if somebody else has figured out some of those things for you. If they haven't, we're going to talk about some shortcuts to work through this as well. So there may be existing vulnerabilities in hardware. There may be some in software. Software bill of materials might help with that. We're calling those SBOMs, and there's some companies, NetRise and Adolas and some others, that can help you analyze the firmware in a device. But we're going to look at some shortcuts, like assuming that it was compromised and figuring out how bad that could be. Okay, so we've talked about this Pca pump. You push the button and you get some of the drug that's delivered. What are some of our vulnerabilities? Oh, one more that I found is that inside here it has almost a commodity USB connector. It looked like there used to be a serial only connection, and they added some Ethernet and wireless USB Wi-Fi connector. And if you look on it carefully, I don't know if you can see it on the slide, but it says that this is a modified D-Link DWL G132 wireless adapter. And if you go look for vulnerabilities in it, you see there's a remote code execution, remote execution of arbitrary code. What does that mean? It means you're screwed. I mean, it means that somebody can remotely run any arbitrary code on that device. Now, that's not necessarily a complete compromise, but that would be interesting. So that all these communication channels end up going through a serial connection to the actual pump. So there's a communication board, and then it goes through a serial connection to the actual pump hardware. And if I was looking at this pump from the beginning and just wanted to do a security analysis of it, and there wasn't any existing vulnerabilities published, I might plug into where that communication board talks to the rest of the pump. And that's what I've done here using this kind of cheap logic analyzer. And I'm looking at the serial communication back and forth. This is interesting because I want to know how much I can compromise this device if I had total control of this communication board. Because it might not give me total control of the device, particularly because it's a serial connection, and those tend to have a small attack surface. It's not like it's a lot of open ports and services. So one of the things I might do is, without actually having to compromise that communication board, I can consider what kind of vulnerabilities or what kind of additional features I could unlock in this device if I could compromise that board, right? Kind of jumping ahead to what could happen without actually having to do all that work. One of the questions that came up looking at this board was, if this machine was completely compromised, how fast could it push a drug? So the way I took a look at that is that if it was totally compromised, how fast could it push the drug? In order to understand that, I have to go down into the hardware. So I pull the pump apart, and I see the stepper motor. That's what actually pushes the syringe to push the drug. And then I found the diagram of that stepper motor circuit, and I looked at it on the oscilloscope to see how it actually moved the drug. Now, I could have worked on compromising the software and reverse engineering it, but frankly, that sounds like a lot of work, and hackers, right? So the fastest way to find out is I built another control board for that stepper motor. And that's this right here, so that I can control how fast I want to try to run that stepper motor and see if it can keep up. You turn this little knob, you plug this board in. Now, I didn't modify the hardware in as much as that I connected it to the existing driver chip on that PCA pump. So I'm sending the signal through the regular control system in the pump, right? This is going to allow me to simulate how fast I could push a drug if I had only compromised the software. But I'm able to do it faster because I'm just plugging into the hardware really quickly. Lifting a couple of pins, soldering these other pins on there, using some Kapton tape. And what I found was actually I could push medicines through this pump at about 4 times the maximum published rate that this pump could do at all. So if I can compromise that board, not only can I ignore the drug libraries or replace them, but I can push drugs much faster than you might expect. So we we've jumped down to what this board is capable of without necessarily having to compromise all of it. We know there are various reasons that people might want to do that. Ransomware, how much would you pay to have your ORs back? Terrorism, people with different political beliefs, perhaps to injure someone. And now just to talk super briefly about categorizing these risks. Something like that Pca pump may, or well, let's say for some of these devices, you might need physical access to compromise them. And physical access pretty much always wins, right? If I can take that pump into the bathroom with me for an hour or so, I will own it. But that's a kind of one-off. You'd have to get to each pump to compromise it. It represents some risk, but not a lot compared to some of the other risks. Now let's assume it's connected to a network, which, right, pretty much all these devices are these days. Maybe if I come into the facility and I find an Ethernet jack in the room or in the waiting room or a nurse's station somewhere, maybe I can compromise a handful of these devices at once. But that depends upon how good your subnets are, what kind of firewall rules you have in place, right? But that would be a larger risk because I might be able to get several of them. If that network also includes some internet access, well, now maybe I can get to lots of them at the facility remotely, and maybe even multiple facilities, right? So that represents even more risk. And a variation on that is that if there are some existing machines in the environment, whether it's a physician workstation or a nurse workstation or other equipment, can it be compromised and then connect to these other devices to attack them? That's commonly done by a phishing email, where they might download a piece of software that they think is good, but it's actually malicious. Or occasionally what we call a drive-by, just surfing to a website or getting a malicious email might cause that to happen. All right, and that is it. Here's my contact information. If you want to follow, we'll be doing some video on how to compromise some keypad locks like in safes and other equipment. That will be coming up October the 14th as well. And if you're interested in hardware hacking, that kind of thing, follow me on X Twitter or follow me on LinkedIn. And you can direct message me there too, if you like. Also, if you have any more comments about what I was talking about, other interesting points or things I missed, put it in the chat channel. I want to go back and look at it. So with that, thank you very much for your time. I hope to see you elsewhere online, and I will pass it back over to keep things on schedule. Back to Rich or whoever is taking over at this point.
Monte, that was both riveting and scary as usual, all in the same time.
Well,
Yes.
Thank you.
There's a duality to all of this, for sure.
I absolutely love it. Again, thank you for your time. I know that the comments were going on. There's a lot of interest in that. It seems like you definitely know a lot when it comes to it. I'm pretty sure you'll hear from a lot of people on the various social media channels there.